everybody. If you're watching this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Um, so I'm here to give a review of Sly Lives, aka The Burden of Black Genius. There's a special on Hulu about Sly and the Family Stone, um, basically about Sly. And I know I grew up on his music. My mother introduced me to so many different forms of music, from classical, knowing Beethoven, knowing Mozart, knowing the blues, knowing B.B. King, Luther Vandross, and that's next on my list. Okay. I'm just not sure how emotionally capable I am of being able to talk about. That's why I'm afraid to look at it. Okay. But I am going to look at it. But anyway, Sly and the Family Stone. So Sly and the Family Stone, if you know anything, I am everyday people. Okay, anyway, he has a lot of hits and a lot of things that people have sampled over the years. So even when you hear the originals, you'll be like, wait, that sounds like it's one of those. But anyway, so Sly and the Family Stone was unique, to say the least, because it had black and white people in a band along with men and women at a time when nobody else was doing that. And it wasn't forced. It was just like what Sly decided to do. And this was produced by Questlove. Shout out to Questlove, because Summer of Soul was excellent. And he got an Oscar for that one, which nobody remembers because that's the night Will Smith smacked the shit out of Chris Rock. And we don't even remember hardly Beyonce's performance. We don't remember nothing else from that night. But anyway, so I hope you get another one so you can enjoy your moment, because Chris Rock was presenting it to him. Anyway, I grew up listening to Sly, especially because I also grew up on Tom Joyner's morning show on the way to school and stuff like that. And 70s Soul Weekend was playing. Anyway, they had my man though doing a lot of the interviews, George Clinton. Another one I was taught to love and appreciate, George Clinton and the Funkadelics. Okay, and this shit is still high. I don't care what y'all say. I love me some George Clinton. All right, but anyway, and you know the Mothership. If you look that album up, because that's a classic album, the actual Mothership is in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, because I have a picture of that. Anyway, okay. So talking about Sly in this documentary or whatever, which I think was actually very well done. They said he was bringing people together at a time, you know, when the country was divided. So we're looking at the 60s or whatever. So they start showing images like they usually do of Vietnam, the Vietnam War, images of Stokely Carmichael in the late 1960s. And the one thing that always irks me about stuff like this, and this is me processing the documentary, okay? This is not a read to the documentary because I actually recommend it. But I hate when people do this in documentaries. Whenever they talk about Black people resisting, so like the Stokely Carmichaels, aka Kwame Ture, resisting against the overt oppression that was placed upon them, because now you have cameras on it, and the covert institutional oppression, like keeping us out of, you know, universities, colleges, jobs, and stuff like that. They always try to insert another Black person, talking about they were trying to bring people together while, you know, these radical bad Black people were trying to further divide the country, as if, I hate that. The country has always been racially divided since slavery, and y'all made it that way. So I always hate that narrative. It just annoys me. But anyway, and white people have been eating it up, and stealing Black music, and then setting Black people up to perform where only they could watch, like they did in the cotton clubs in Harlem and stuff like that. The country has always been divided. All right. So, yeah, miss me with that. All right. So they said at the beginning, you know, it was all about the music, which it usually is when you're a musician. But as time went on, it became about everything else, stuff like drugs, alcohol, legal trouble. And that's not exactly a unique story. And that's why I appreciate the way this was done, because the question is this idea about Black genius. And I kind of was annoyed at the title, even though I was interested in it. So they asked people like D'Angelo, Andre 3000 is interviewed, Dream Hampton is interviewed. And while we on it, Dream Hampton, if somebody is going to do an appropriate and properly done docu-series on anybody like Diddy, because all of this shit that's coming out, it's just trash. It's just a bunch of stories. It's not well researched and done. I know Tubi tried, but I wasn't even checking for that. I didn't even look at the one on Peacock. It's too much. But when she did that thing with R. Kelly, which definitely deserved a fucking Emmy, it was so well done. The way she had psychologists, the way she had chronicled it, like it was so well done. And that's really what led to his prosecution and imprisonment. It helped, gather the public. Anyway, I say that to say, girl, you should do some more work with that kind of stuff because you did an excellent job. Anyway, so D'Angelo, Brown Sugar D'Angelo, okay, they're asking him what he thinks Black genius is, along with a series of other artists, George Clinton, Shaka Khan, Andre 3000. And nobody could really explain it, Q-Tip, because they were essentially like, I mean, what the hell does that mean, right? And they asked Andre 3000 if he believes in the concept of Black genius. And he says, I just know I like it when it happens, which is interesting. And I love Andre 3000, and it's not just because I'm from Atlanta, and shout out to Outkast. But I always like his mystique and the level of Afrofuturism he kind of embraces. But to some degree, the reason why I get annoyed with Black genius or Black excellence, that term really bothers me, is because it's another way of othering us and othering us by us. Like, you know what I mean? Any Black person that's a genius or any Black person who is excellent at what they do is a genius and is excellent. Because what it takes for Black people to get through school, to go through college, to get record deals, to get advanced degrees, whatever it is, not just the hard work and commitment that you would expect of one, but having every possible obstacle thrown in your way, being paid less, being discouraged. For example, your professors grading your papers differently or more harshly in those graduate environments. I can attest to that. And the way in which your non-Black peers are disproportionately higher in number everywhere around you and all seem to be in this secret cult, okay, to belittle, undermine, and isolate you. And that has an effect on people. And I know that personally. So to be excellent or to be a genius as a Black person, to me, you've already surpassed all the other groups of people because those extreme cases of racism are always reserved for us. And our excellence, as far as I'm concerned, is just the standard of excellence. White excellence is somewhere down here. Because what we have to do to be excellent, it's so hard to achieve. And that's just my little note or whatever, but they really do kind of follow this term because, and I think he did it well, because the point is Black genius is still not allowed to exist as genius in the sort of freedom that comes with whiteness. There's always these extra burdens. Anyway, so we start out, he started out as a DJ in San Francisco, which I didn't know. I just thought he had been a musician, somebody who kind of worked his way up in the Bay Area. Swim was his first gold record. I said, okay now. And he got his first gold record at like 19. They said he was producing other artists. They had him writing for other people. And they were like, he was a natural producer. Like he played every instrument. His songs always included a multitude of genres. You couldn't put him in a box. And we can't let these kind of stories about our artists die, because I think in the Black community in particular, musical talent is so plenteous that it's so easy for us to just kind of move on to the next artist, next artist, next artist, next artist, because that's how rich the culture is, especially musically. But it's important that we also, make sure we're studying our legends and that kids know about them, and that helps them be able to feel a way about themselves. Anyway, so they asked, why do you think he had to do so much to be so good to get the credit? Talking about Sly Stone. D'Angelo was like, Black people have always had to work 2 to 3 to 4 times as hard as everybody else just to break even. So the producer asked why. And D'Angelo was, and granted, people who ask these questions for documentaries are asking them to get a response. He was like, why do you ask why? You know why, Yoda. I said, I can't. All right, anyway. So once again, not a truly unique story. He started out in the church, but in the sanctified church. That tends to be the Pentecostals, I think. Yeah. So that is where he learned and got his experience in learning music. They said he does narrate parts of this documentary, um, in the sense that they're playing voiceovers from him where he's been recorded talking about his story. Um, but he doesn't actually participate, like sit down. And that just was a choice. He went to community college and studied music some more. They said he sung with white kids in high school band groups, and he said that he used to piss the black kids off. Now, I don't know how many of y'all have been consistently following me, but some of y'all, even though those who support my channel, I love you and appreciate you, but I have a beef with black people in California, okay, based on my experience, not something from afar, okay? They are some of the most unconscious black people I've ever met. So when I heard that the black kids was pissed off because he was singing with white kids in the group, I was like, first of all, most of y'all out there are a bunch of dark white people. Now, miss me with the old Kendricks from there. Yeah, there are always exceptions to the rule. Miss me, all right? And California is super racist. And then they try to hide behind that white liberalism. And I can't stand the hypocrisy. Like in Georgia, like I like my racist. I like to know what I'm looking at. I find the hypocrisy of that California racism much worse. Because at least the racists know they racist. And I mean, it's not good, but it's just something about that I always resent it. So when he's talking about that, I was like, I remember being judged like that when I was in LA, and this was well into my time in LA when I was at UCLA, and I was hanging out with a friend, and he's Mexican American, and he had about a 2-year-old daughter, and he was older than me in the program, and so we actually had ended up working as teaching associates, as you did as graduate students in the same office, and so that's how I got to know him. But he was really like a mentor to me, and I needed a mentor. I really did. And we had gone to the mall. He had a little girl about 2 years old at the time. And he said, look, I'm just wondering if you would just come to the mall with us because I just have to get her out of the house and she's kind of, all over the place. And I said, yeah, because I always use this as an opportunity to ask him questions. Yeah, I can meet you at the mall and go get this little girl some shoes. And I'm walking with him and his daughter. This is not my daughter, okay? But sometimes I would keep his daughter if he had like to go to class or something. So I'm walking through the mall. Now, mind you, these black people act so white in LA any other time. I'm walking with him as my friend, right? Holding the little girl's hand or whatever. And those black people in that mall were staring me down so hard. Like, why are you with this Mexican guy? I was like, in my mind, let me tell you something, how enraged I was. I was like, you black people don't ever think that there's any real racism out here in California unless it's just absolutely egregious. And then once it happens, y'all are always making excuses. Well, this one incident, I don't think they meant to, this, that, and the other. And then y'all got the nerve to look at me like I have somehow betrayed the race by walking with my Mexican American friend. So I believe Sly Stone. I know that's a long way of getting to the point, okay? But I was listening to that and I was like, ooh, that's pissing me off. I remember that. Anyway, honestly, Sly seems very much within that Black California framework, but I love his music. So, yep, it don't matter. Anyway, so they talked about his work ethic. They said he worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They were like, if he was working with the people on the drums, that's when your horns would sleep, right there with the band. When he was working with the horns, that's when the people who play drums would sleep because he believed in working and getting it right. There is something, I don't care what happens. I respect people so much who work hard and who are intensely committed to being excellent at whatever they do. There is nothing I think I respect more than that. One of the things that aggravate me to my soul till this day, from the time I was a teenager, through college, through graduate school, even as a professional, when people accuse me of being a workaholic and working too hard. Now, maybe is that true? But it always came across to me as judgment. And I feel like there are so many other ways that is the way I managed to function, was to always work extremely hard at what I had committed myself to. learning history, teaching, whatever I did in school, before I even knew about a college major. I was taught, you work hard, and you know it the best. That's what I was supposed to do. And it always came across to me, like I said, as judgment. And there are so many things you can be addicted to that can destroy you. And I just don't feel like hard work is one of those stress. I'm not saying that hard work, people can't get stressed out, heart attacks and stuff like that. But if it's between working hard all the time versus cocaine, all right, versus pink cocaine, versus these destructive drugs, I'll take it. And so this is what they were saying about him. And considering the other things that happened, you know what I mean? I don't think that's a bad thing. They weren't necessarily saying it in a negative way, but I think that's how you get some of the best fucking art, books, writing, singing by people who work like this. And that's exactly what we got. Anyway, his first record with or album with Sly and the Family Stone, it flopped. They were like, we were heartbroken, this and the other. They said then he wrote Dance to the Music, and that was a hit, and they were off. They got rounded up by the police in Detroit because they were trying to make a connection between the politics at the time. During the rebellions that took place after Martin Luther King was murdered. Because this country shut down for a week because Black people were rioting based off the murder that the government had carried out against Martin Luther King. So they asked, they're showing old interviews, and they said, does it make it harder to write when you see all these terrible things happening in the world? And he goes, no, it actually makes it easier to write because that stuff made me want to say something. Especially when you get arrested for no reason, just being Black in Detroit when everybody else is rioting and you on your tour bus. So that's how we got the hit Everyday People. Then they start moving into the 1970s. And I am sorry, sometimes the 1970s has always given me this eerie kind of feeling. Because there's a lot of bullshit that happens in the 1970s. We always jump to the 60s and 80s or act like the 60s is the same time as the 70s. No. So George Clinton was talking about, how the hippies were talking about peace and love. He was like, but we were from the ghetto. We couldn't live like that. I mean, our reality was different. So what shows up in music and stuff like that will be different. Agreed. And that's what I mean by like the 1970s bullshit, because the 1970s is a weird time of co-optation of Black organizations through COINTELPRO, sending in other Black people to go and find their secrets. Fred Hampton, in 69 is murdered, and people, countless people, particularly of the Black Panther organization, are not only getting killed, but those people are still living with PTSD. They're holding a special, not gala, but a support thing, February 22nd out there in LA for Black Panthers who fought for the movement, but are now having trouble, healthcare, salary, because that doesn't pay. And a lot of them had to go into hiding. So they were carrying on in the 1970s, especially in places like California, having these interracial churches. And, we're bringing Black people to our organizations and stuff like that. But that's how you also, that guys, helps along with things like Jim Jones' cult, the People's Temple. It gave the impression of coming together racially and this white man who's speaking to Black issues. That's why I don't trust when that happens. I don't care about Tim Wise and him talking to all the stuff that Black people have been saying for centuries, but somehow when a white man says that he deserves to get all of these speaking opportunities. Anyway, and it gave the impression of coming together. Meanwhile, Jim Jones, while having this interracial church of all kinds of people, was imposing racist subjugation of the people in the cult and essentially had a plantation labor camp for Black people in Jonestown, Guyana, all right, before those people committed murder-suicide. So that's why you have to be careful with this kind of forced idea of interracialism and stuff like that. Anyway, the song Stand, that's another bop, S-T-A-N-D. The beat and stuff hit. When I started hearing it, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. And that's another hot one. He had a lot of hits, okay? Trust me, I'm getting my new playlist right now. So they talk about Woodstock. And they were like, he was usually scared before his performances. He was always very nervous. Then he said, as he described Woodstock, he said, then when I saw all of the people that were there, I thought, ooh, we better not make a mistake. And I feel like perfectionists always feel this way. But I also think that kind of constant fear, which isn't healthy, I know because I've dealt with it in therapy with the perfectionism, which isn't healthy, though, is why you get greats like Sly and the Family Stone, why you get Michael Jackson, why you get Prince, why you get Beyonce, why you get James Brown, that kind of intense focus. That is what allows the greats to become great, but it comes at a price. It really does. And apparently, I didn't know that was considered the most memorable performance at Woodstock. I had never heard that. Um, and I didn't know people had saw it that way, but I think that's, great. So he said the reaction to the performance made them big. And he said that he believed, and they're showing him in older interviews. That's why I'm saying Sly saying these things. Um, he said he thought they would make it big eventually. He said, of course that was the goal. He said, but we got big and we got really big, and it was almost just too much at one time. I can imagine being famous. Like that has to be scary. And it has to be lonely too, because you can't prepare or have partners, so to speak. As you go up, less people can go with you. And there's either hangers on, people who are jealous. Just think about Pat Houston, the way she attached herself to Whitney Houston. She had no business being her manager in the first place. You sending pictures to the tabloids of her, like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Anyway, so Andre 3000 said, rock stars make sacrifices for us. Talking about just the audience, the public that wants them. The audiences, and he was like, but it's also like the same thing that makes you great is the same thing that can kill you too. And they just kind of left it there. And I was like, yeah, all the intensity, all the attention. And if it's taken away, it's like pulling a rug from under somebody. That's a hard transition that not everybody can make it out of. Especially if you've had nobody to go before you, or a mentor, or somebody who has been that famous. Because what's the chances? Right? Certainly at this point. Black people have been famous and have been producing music a long time, but they weren't letting Black people really control the music industry. Or, their masters and stuff like that, even with Berry Gordy and them. And he was known for cheating Black people. Anyway, side note, can we please get Terry Lewis, him and his brother, to stop wearing that same old tired church deacon hat and those suits and sunglasses everywhere? That shit is so corny and old. Like, you couldn't put that down. Every time we see them in the interview, I don't know why they think this is just, oh yeah, this is our signature. It is, but not in a good way. It's not like Michael Jackson's slick back ponytail and the moonwalk. It's not like Beyonce's blonde wig and the Crazy in Love dance. It's not. Can y'all please stop showing up like that? Because I realize y'all have produced some of the best music that has ever existed, but y'all, I hate that corny shit. Anyway, so they go on and they're talking about, because it actually was really well done. They talk about Sly Stone's infinite influence on Prince as an artist. And I've recently gotten back into Prince, and they talk about his male and female band and his interracial group that comes along with Prince and the Revolution. And I thought about it and I was like, duh. And the idea, to me, it's so amazing to me, because I think I enjoy learning about who influenced the greats, like who were like the greats' favorite people, like Michael Jackson studying James Brown to a T, and then taking his own stuff. Beyonce studying Tina Turner. A lot of other people, I know those are the only people they study, but it's something about knowing who influenced them that I just find amazing. So even as they're talking about Sly and the Family Stone, late 1960s, they're getting big. They said the idea of a rock band being a Black band was actually not existent. That was not the automatic. And I'm sitting up there listening and watching like Chuck Berry, Tina Turner, Little Richard. What do you mean? People kill me in how they steal from us. And the fact that Sly was considered the crossover artist from rock and roll, says more about the media, like magazines like Rolling Stone, than it does about the Black artists in rock and roll that got ignored. Okay, Little Richard created that whole genre. Are you kidding me right now? Anyway, but yeah, there's a lot of lessons that you can always glean from these documentaries in terms of people's lives and what we can learn, right? Um, so Sly and the Family Stone, they were clear. They said they were not a political group. They said we sung political music and about politics. And the woman was like, I can understand why people think that, but that's not what we were. So apparently the Black Panthers, and I know it was probably either that Oakland or LA crew, um, asked Sly for $100,000 to help support the Black Panthers. And he said, why? Like, what do you plan to do with this money? And they were essentially saying he needed their validation of blackness because he had been a crossover artist. And he said, no. I would have said the same thing. Okay. He didn't do what they did. Now, if you've ever read Elaine Brown's Taste of Power, and you should, that was the only Black woman to chair the Black Panther Party. And she talks about how they would get donations from celebrities. A lot of times they didn't make it public. They would give because one, they supported the cause. And how they would get donations from these celebrities just to keep the lights on, to feed each other, to pay somebody's insurance bill after having a baby, anything like that. This was very much within their framework, and I definitely believe this story. And the majority of the Panthers were women, but the leaders were often these toxic Black men who used them for their work despite claiming socialism. But their leaders, you know, a lot of situations that Elaine Brown talks about where they were physically abusive to Black women. There were Black women that were raped, and it went, you know, where do you go? You're in this Black radical organization. The police already are hostile to you. They ignore Black women's, you know, complaints about sexual assault anyway. And it did depend on the chapter. They said that was less of a thing in Chicago, where Fred Hampton was leading it. But nevertheless, I say that to say this is very much on par for them. And yeah, y'all know I just had to bring in the historical parts of it. So they show Sly Stone on the Dick Cavett show. Now, I've seen stuff with James Baldwin, all your greats, Muhammad Ali on the Dick Cavett show and stuff like that. They said that Dick Cavett had a habit of one-upping people when they came on his show. And he was always trying to be the smartest person on the show to demonstrate to his guests that he was the smartest one. And so when Sly Stone came on there, he was a little bit too much for Dick Cavett because he refused to take these sort of baited questions in hopes that he'd say something stupid and he'd be able to make himself look smart if he responded in certain ways about, you know, politics or African Americans. He wouldn't do it. And they said, even in the midst of this interview, they were like, Sly was high as a Georgia pine when he went on his show. They were like, but his mind was so sharp. Said he refused to take the bait, and it really left Dick Cavett like looking stupid. Because he could trade wits, and Dick Cavett couldn't handle it. His game, his questions were always to make other people look stupid, which I personally thought was funny. Anyway, Dream Hampton made a good point because when they were interviewing her, she said that a big part of Black success is guilt. And I was kind of like, that's interesting. She said the guilt of leaving your neighborhood, your family, and honestly, you're about to be on a very lonely journey. And I believe that. Because even what's considered successful in our society is dominated by white men and women and whatever their culture is, their version of success. Because if you're Black and you've been in a room full of white people, you don't have a lot in common. You do know they resent you for being there. You can feel it. They can smile in your face and you can literally feel it. And those people don't always have your best interest or each other's, but it's not as consequential. And to have that much talent and to be making that kind of money and to have so much to give the world, but not to be able to be culturally connected. It's difficult. It's like being a tree without roots. So anyway, Sly decided in the late 1960s that he would move to LA. Like I said, he's from the Bay Area. And he buys this huge house. They said he was making all this money. And he invited some of his old friends down from Oakland. And there was a lot of new hangers on. They were like Black and white. And there were a lot of drugs coming in and out that house. and people were always in and out. It was too many people. He became too accessible, which meant that people could kind of come in and maneuver. Andre 3000 said Black artists have this thing where people always want to be good in your hood. No matter how far you go, you need that for some reason. And he said that can be a detriment to many Black artists. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, if we've seen it once, we've seen it 1,000 times, right? You want to go back. You want to give, you want to remind people that you are not somebody who forgot about them. But at the same time, there are some really true consequences by keeping people who are just not on your level. And I think that's what Dream Hampton meant by it's going to get lonely, really lonely. So they said he started to collaborate with a lot of artists, but they were like, they interviewed Bobby Womack, and Bobby Womack was like, yeah, he collaborated with a lot of people, but they never got any work done. Like he was like, he would go in there and he would like get high. He was like him, Billy Preston. They brought up Ike Turner. I said, I'd be good. I'd be motherfucked, okay? Ike Turner and his battering ram of a fucking personality manages to destroy one too many people for me, okay? Okay. Anyway, so he started taking drugs. They said he really was like overwhelmed with the fame and where to go. And, it was just hard. And people do look for an alternate reality. And I think that's always the question we should keep in mind when people judge people who end up on drugs. Yes, we should always discourage people from taking drugs. But what pain are they trying to numb? What led them to that? Right? Because drugs have been a bad thing. Even with heroin before, crack and cocaine, like we knew that had detrimental effects. But what keeps driving people to it? Because that's really how you get at the core of the problem in rehab. Anyway, so when he took drugs, it kept him from keeping up with his tour dates, because we all know once you get addicted, you cannot run a regular schedule. They just cannot. He had to cancel stuff, or he was showing up unprepared for performances. And initially they said he could show up late and high and wouldn't miss a beat, because that's how good he was. And he could perform well. Audience wouldn't notice a thing. They said, but eventually, those drugs really took their toll. He couldn't be as sharp, because they were like, even when he was high, his mind and his ability to perform music was so well that even if he was like mentally down, like that for somebody else was actually good. Like his worst was what some people's best was to some degree. And they said angel dust and PCP in particular, that's what really kind of sent him down. And he eventually got into cocaine and stuff. Now, they said he was incredibly generous, and they said he was a very kind person, and he was vulnerable. And his vulnerability was also what made him such a great songwriter. They were like, but those drugs took him down because he was trying to self-medicate. He was trying to self-soothe and create a reality that was not there because the pressures of fame had just gotten too much. And they said the music and the band went down. One of the members said he just left. He said because it went from being all about the music to other things that just weren't good things. And I imagine were many people influencing Sly Stone who had not been with him from the beginning, like other people who were in the band. And this, the white guy said, I quit, but I didn't quit because I had something else to do. He was like, I took a year off. It was really hard for me because we had been in this band, and to see him decline like that was difficult. And that guy was an original member, but he left. They said Sly spent a lot of time in his room, and I was like, yeah, he's probably, doing drugs. But they were like, he spent a lot of time in his room, but that's not what they said. They were like playing all the instruments, laying down tracks, using new technology. And so you have this woman named Ruth Copeland, a woman who was a singer that knew him. And she said that his band started not to like it, that he was spending all his time in his room. And yeah, he was taking drugs. She was like, he was producing a lot of music. because they started feeling like he didn't need them. And I was like, okay, I, I get it, but I was also kind of impressed that he started to do all of this on his own. He had always been able to play other instruments, but he was teaching other people, the chords and that kind of stuff. But I was like, he's playing all these instruments by himself, still producing tracks, making hits while having a drug addiction. I was more impressed that he was able to do that. Sorry that you felt not needed, but okay. So that's also when he wrote A Family Affair, which we know is a big hit. All you got to do is hear the first like 10 seconds and you'll look like, oh, that's him. That's him. So they said he moved from being on the pop stations, just the pop stations and rock and roll, to the R&B stations started to play his music more often, especially with this song, because people knew what he meant in terms of the words, like the lyrics about not being able to cry around your family because you'll look broke down, but you cry anyway because you are broke down. And I said, well, I really only knew the hook of that song, but that makes sense. I'm going to go back and really listen to it. And then he comes up with the album, There's a Riot Going On, which everybody said was a response to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. And the response is The Riot's Going On. And it was much more of a political album, like a purposeful political album. And the cover for that album, it was a black and white American flag or whatever. And Andre 3000 said that's what inspired the black and white flag on Stankonia, which, if you know, you know, one of the greatest rap albums of all time, period. I don't care what nobody says, by Outkast. So the album apparently pissed off a lot of white music critics. So he saw, just that quick, with that response, they were, trashing the album. And so they had people talking who understood the music industry, who were black. They were like, he felt like, the white critics felt like he was supposed to be an integrationist. You're supposed to be on our side. You're not trying to be political on purpose. And they kind of felt like he betrayed us. He really is one of the black people that he's been born as, right? I said, white people are a trip. They are a trip, but it also lets you know that they like to keep black people in boxes or reaffirm, because we already know this, and can only like us as long as we behave a certain way that is pleasing to them. If they get angry when you're having or taking political stances, and not just disagreeing with you, because that happens, you're supposed to engage in dialogue like that, but trying to put you back in a certain position, they never respected you and they never liked you from the gate. They liked what they could get from you. And they started talking about apparently how Sly Stone was always very fearful. And they said he had a lot of paranoia. They were like, especially after Greg left, because he was one of the original members, the white guy or whatever. And I was like, yeah, that's probably part of it. But cocaine also is one of the side effects, is deep, deep paranoia. And it can perpetuate other forms of trauma if they're there. Like, Richard Pryor was a brute against women consistently throughout his life. And cocaine only exacerbated that. It wasn't because of the cocaine that made him abusive, because we didn't hear about him putting his hands on anybody in this documentary or when he was on TV One. So I said, there's something got to be in you. Anyway, so Larry Graham, he was the black man, and he was his bass player, and when they started talking about his chords, I was like, yeah, I know those sounds, right? Specifically from those songs. They said people started stirring up tensions. This is what they meant with the hangers on. People coming in and out, saying that, Larry was trying to upstage him, so on and so forth. So they're interviewing Larry Graham, who actually looks amazing, okay, for his age and everything else. He looks great, okay? He said, I always had a tendency to move away from negativity. Like I would just kind of pull back. He said, we didn't have a blow up. He said, I knew what was being said. I knew what he was being told to think. He said, it wasn't hard. It wasn't complicated. He said, I just left the group. I didn't want to be bothered with it. I didn't want to fight with Sly, and so I just left. And I respect that. I get that. So it got to the point that the music that Sly Stone was playing didn't need a band. He traveled with a band because his fan base was expecting Sly and the Family Stone. But the music he was creating was really for one person because he had something else he was trying to do. And I'm kind of listening, like, I understand how there are people in the band that feel away, but also being an instrumentalist, you can go and be an instrumentalist elsewhere. But I do think an artist, certainly somebody with that much talent and that ability to blend genres because they're just so embracing of different music, does have the right to change their course. Like, it's not even to me like an In Vogue or shout out to In Vogue. Did y'all see them? I only knew because of TikTok because I don't really watch sports. But they sung at the All-Star game sounding good. Anyway, but I do think the artist has a right to change. It was in the documentary, they were treating it like a read, like he was just kind of dismissive of these people. But I was also like, well, I mean, okay. Anyway, so as his music became less relevant to white audiences, they said he had influenced tons of artists, tons of them. But then those artists became his musical competition and peers in many ways because of the kind of shift in his audience with so many white critics trying to push him out of like rock and roll, which he had plenty of black fans, but he had a much wider fan base. They said, so he started to do events to remain relevant. And that's where I think the danger of fame and can be so damaging to people. Because it's hard to go from being a superstar to just not really people caring about you anymore in the same way. So they said he got married at Madison Square Garden as a way to pack out the performance because that was the only way they could pack out the garden. And I was thinking to myself, the fact that people even care enough about Sly to come and see him get married says to me he was still famous. Let's not act like, okay, packing out Madison Square Garden is easy. My mother actually said she was there. She was like, I said, Ma, how old were you? And she was like, I was in middle school. She was like, but my uncle took her when she was in middle school and he didn't really tell her where they were going. And she said, I ended up seeing him get married right there in the garden. Anyway, so it was their performance though after that at Radio City Music Hall that you could kind of sense blood in the water. Like the group was breaking apart, you know, in interviews. He said, they asked him, like, well, did your band fall apart? What is your band doing nowadays? He was like, whatever I tell him to do, and started laughing. And granted, I don't think it would have pissed people off if they didn't see him like behaving so differently from what he had once been. And I'm talking about the group, not the media. And his female trumpet player, who's the only one in there, only female trumpet player, I mean, she was like, we showed up for that performance. She said we hadn't been practicing. And the other guy from the band was like, it was empty in there. It was empty. It was like 200 people. I said, yeah, y'all were big then. Because in my mind, 200 people still ain't bad, especially if y'all felt like y'all were falling off. And they got really bad reviews or whatever. But it seemed like there was also a changing wave of music and music sound that he had difficulty keeping up with. By that I mean Sly. Not because of his talent, but really because of the drugs. So his ability to use all these different kinds of sounds and produce good music and stuff like that, I think was really impacted more by his drug use. And he started losing relevance and fame, and that can take a toll on anybody. I think that really does. And I think that's why we'll see celebrities from a different time when they were bigger, just kind of doing stuff for attention, like Steve Urkel, for example. Anyway, I'm not going to start. And that really took him down psychologically. And fame can do that. I don't know personally because I've never been famous, but we've witnessed it enough. You know what I mean? So the band kind of fell apart after Radio City Hall. And they said he went through this phase where he tried to capitalize on things that had made him money and being famous. And so he was struggling. So he tried to kind of he tried to move himself back to writing music that had really made him a lot of money. So he was still writing new music. And they said he was struggling to write those optimistic records because he wasn't optimistic. He was on drugs and he was struggling. So George Clinton comes in, George Clinton and the Funkadelics, and he was like, we had heard Sly had kind of fell off. He was like, so we let him come on our first tour of the mothership. Okay. He said, and we let him open for us. He said, we started to spend a lot of time together, him and the Funkadelics. George Clinton was like, but basically, if we're being honest, by the 80s, a lot of things were shifting in terms of drugs. He was like, we were crackheads. He was like, if I'm being really honest, both me and him were. We got high together. He said, and the thing is about, cocaine, that first high, you never get that high again. You're always looking for it. But whatever it does, you never reach that level of highness again. And so it can eat you alive. So he was like, we were like two kids together. We were always just constantly getting high. So in the early night, but see, the thing is with George Clinton's music, you can do George Clinton's music good and hot because, they were the Funkadelics, right? The psychedelic sort of approach was to be hot. His whole audiences were hot. Another concert, my mother said she ended up at with my uncle. Anyway, so in the early 1980s, they said that's when they started to see the reporting of Sly Stone in and out of jail because of drugs. He was arrested over and over again. They said he became a great example of bringing down a renegade, during this conservative era. And Dream Hampton made the point, it wasn't just a conservative era because of Reagan, but the general public around this hostility toward drugs and drug addicts, while also making drugs more available to people. So he eventually goes to rehab. They said he did well. Even like members of the band who had stopped or whatever, they said, people said, hey, you should check on Sly because Sly is actually doing better, and they said he was for a while. They said he looked well, he looked better. You could tell that he was, it had done a good job for him. But they said, 3-4 months later, he started back on drugs. He continued to get arrested after that. And they talked to his son, and his son was from the marriage at Madison Square Garden, even though he was born before the parents got married. He said, my mom divorced him when I was like 3. And she said she just didn't want him to be in that rock star lifestyle because they were all around drugs at that point, and it just wasn't healthy. She didn't think to raise a kid in. And I think that was a very smart move. Then they interviewed his daughter. He has 2 daughters. One was by the woman trumpet player. Y'all should go back and see that Unsung with Sly and the Family Stone because she really gave the business in that one. But she had a daughter, and her daughter was talking, and she said, honestly, yeah, I did grow up. My father was like absent, but I still grew up like in an environment around him because of the music that my mother was involved in. And she was like, I was around way too many adults. She was like, I had my friends over one day and we were playing house. And she said, there was always razor blades around. And she said, I took the razor blade and I had these things of chalk and I started chopping it up. I said, we're going to do what adults do, chop it up. She said, and then we were sniffing it. She said, it was crazy. Like, she said, I looked back on it and realized that's what I was doing. She said, I had all my friends sneezing and coughing. She was like, my mom came outside and was like, what was going on? She said, she beat the brakes off of me. And then I realized, I was like, okay, see, that's why the son's mother got away. Because you do what you see people around you do. And if they're not corrected, why would you believe it was wrong? But I'm sure having other people's kids over your house, that was not the look you wanted to go for. So I understand. Anyway, they said Sly came out with new music late 80s and was producing records that were completely different from what he had done before. So he had this white female manager who's on there talking and said, it wasn't that the music wasn't good or whatever, but I just, the business part just wasn't there. He didn't know, I didn't know either, that he could have played the same old songs, gone on tour and made plenty of money doing it off the old stuff, like a lot of people do, those old school tours. Like, people love that stuff. And I was like, he should have fired your dumb ass. Because at that point, you had plenty of people, like the Temptations doing that. You still had older groups. The Jackson 5s had a reunion tour and stuff. Like, You know what I mean? Like, you also didn't know what you were doing. Okay, so there's a lot of people in here that be talking, and I'm sitting up here like, okay, but you had a role in this, and it was not a good one. Anyway, um, so they said he was trying to recreate himself as a musician, but that's part of the perfectionism, right? I don't want to do. I thought I was supposed to write new jokes every day, you know, like for a comedian who's great. I thought I was supposed to write new songs. I don't know if I can ever do that again. Nobody's gonna want to hear that from me again. So let me do something different. Um, but they made the point that while he was doing that, he didn't realize that hip hop artists were making this music. And I thought they were going to say, well, you know, people wanted this different kind of style. But instead, they were like, he didn't realize that while hip hop was becoming the thing, those people were studying him. They were making music, using his beats, shouting him out on records, and he just couldn't see the influence he had had on an entire generation because he wanted to get away from the pain and he was drowning in drugs. He couldn't see what was in front of him. That so many people appreciated what he had to offer. And I can imagine that that's difficult to see, though, when you go from the highest heights of fame to being brought down, and the shame from the drugs and that kind of thing. So in 1993, Sly and the Family Stone get inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But they also said in the 1990s, Sly went into this reclusive state because of all the things that happened. They originally they thought he wasn't going to come. They couldn't tell. He didn't tell them whether he was coming or not to be inducted. And then midway through the speeches that the band was giving, he came from up under the curtain to accept the award, which was nice. And he was like, "Okay, I'll see y'all soon." And like they had the band members just kind of like, the one guy was like, "I thought that meant, you know, we get back together." He said, "But it never happened." And I was like, "Yeah, but he never told y'all that was going to happen either." Just saying, just saying. All right. So anyway, just saying. The question toward the end of that's by the producers to these different artists, like I told you, Q-Tip, D'Angelo, George Clinton, Shaka Khan, other people's names I can't remember, was, is there a burden to Black genius? D'Angelo was just like, yes. Andre 3000 was like, it's a burden and it's the wings. I was like, Andre 3000 is so deep. Do y'all think Beyonce would have married him if she didn't marry Jay-Z? I'm just saying. Okay. Anyway, Q-Tip was interviewed, and I'm not gonna lie, Q-Tip seemed high as fuck. I couldn't take nothing he was saying seriously, and he kept off. I said, never mind. So there was a professor that said Black artists in this music context are consumed. They will use you up, take every bit of talent, every bit of creativity, every bit of ideas, and make as much money as possible off, and then they throw you away. They treat you like you're expendable. And they'll just find another Black person to exploit. And it's part of that richness of our culture that they've been able to exploit financially by controlling the music industry. They don't produce the music, but they always get paid more from it. Shaka Khan said the same thing. She was like, that is what they do in this industry. And one man was like, one of the main questions facing a Black artist, he said, is, quite frankly, who do you think you are? He was like, that's what they're always asking you. You know, who are you to demand this? Who are you to actually be talented and know it? And white people not be able to control you. That is always, it's like kind of a how dare you, you know, stand in your Blackness and confidence. And that was what they said. The Sly was always very confident. And I can totally see that. White people think that on a regular basis. D'Angelo was like, white rock and rollers, they die in style. They have money to give their kids, has generational wealth. And we should have that. And I wasn't really sure if he thought maybe like, if he thought we, like Black artists, should do better with it. But I was also like, yeah, white people get second chances. White people get better contracts. I mean, think about how cracked Taylor Swift's notes are. But that's considered greatness for whiteness, and that you can actually feel like she is an appropriate comparison to somebody like Beyonce, who's been in the industry for 28 years now. The level of work it took her, as opposed to Taylor Swift, whose father was has this whole massive chicken industry and bought the first 50,000 records. So it made it look like her record was good. And so people buy into what's created as an image. And I was just like, it's unfortunate because actually Black people do deserve to live off that wealth because they have been exploited. Anyway, they show his 3 kids' reflections on him. All of them are grown. All of them, all the girls have his nose. They look like him. And they said the past few years have actually been the best years. They said because he really was absent for a large part of our childhood because of the drugs. And the son talked about how it's difficult seeing his father on the news, but not really having a relationship with him because he's in jail and that kind of thing. But he said he's willing to, they all said, like, he's been trying to fix it. He wants to make it right with them. He spends time with his grandkids. And as far as I'm concerned, Questlove, you did the damn thing with this documentary again. And I hope you get your Oscar. And I hope Will Smith will be on his best behavior or not, or just not be there. But anyway, thank y'all for watching this. I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.